Her final broadcast ends in silence and death. Welcome to Shadow Code. I am your host, Thornwick. Comment your theories below. I love reading them. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at the brownstone, a lull between the usual rounds of phone calls, visitors and the daily parade of irritations that typically caused Nero Wolfe to declare his disapproval of the outside world. I had just returned from a late lunch, and it appeared that the day would slide smoothly into a dreary evening. But I should have known better. Things at the brownstone are never quiet for long. The doorbell rang. That in itself isn't unusual, though I can't say I was thrilled at the prospect of another surprise caller. But when I opened the door to a woman standing there, her dark glasses perched carefully on the bridge of her nose and a cigarette smouldering in her left hand, I knew it was no ordinary visit. Her name was Violet Melrose, and she was a name that most people recognized, especially in radio circles. Famous as the host of a late-night program called The Midnight Hour, Violet had a voice that was as soothing as it was commanding, one that could silence a room full of strangers. For a woman who made her living talking, she was a mystery to most, the kind of mystery Wolfe liked, though he would never admit it. She wasn't smiling when she stepped into the brownstone's hallway, her heels tapping lightly on the floor as she walked past me, like she was on her way to a private audience. With a king, but the sense of self-assurance faded when I looked closer. There was an underlying tension in her face, a heaviness I couldn't place. Wolfe had been on the phone with his orchids, but I didn't think I needed to explain who she was. Violet Melrose had a reputation, and it wasn't just confined to her program. "You've got an ear for good radio," she said once we'd settled into the sitting room. She handed me a note that was written in a hasty scrawl, something that looked like a mix of frustration and urgency. "I need Wolfe," she said, ignoring the fact that I was the one handling the door. I nodded. "He's waiting," I replied, and left the room to fetch Wolfe, who was, of course, perfectly settled in his chair without a single hint of movement. "You've heard of Miss Melrose, haven't you?" I asked him as I stepped into his office. "I have," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "She hosts a program, quite popular among those who think they can decipher the voices behind the microphone. She is well known for more than her voice, I gather." I paused. "It's a long story, but it seems like she's in some kind of trouble. She's brought us here for help." He sighed, as he always did when a matter of minimal importance, at least in his view, was delivered to him in such an imprecise way. "Then, bring her in," he said, waving a hand. "But do it quickly, Archie. I'm due to take my afternoon nap soon." I turned on my heel and headed back to the sitting room. When I returned with Violet, she was no longer the confident woman I had met at the door. She was nervous, pacing in a circle, her fingers pressing the cigarette to her lips with increasing tension. She sat down without permission. "Something," Wolfe noted with a disapproving glance. "What is it you require of me?" Wolfe's voice was slow, measured, and deliberate. Violet took a deep breath, as though summoning the courage to speak. "I'm not here for an ordinary case, Wolfe. I'm being blackmailed." Her words hung in the air, and I could see Wolfe's eyes narrow. This was no small matter. People who are blackmailed often hide far deeper secrets than a simple demand for money. Wolfe didn't move, though I could tell he was already forming an opinion of the situation. "Who is blackmailing you, Miss Melrose?" he asked. His question was simple but precise, cutting through the tension. Violet didn't answer immediately. She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street. I could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. "Man's name is Clark Donovan," she said finally. "He's an executive producer at my station. He's been in the industry for years, longer than I've been on the air. A few months ago he made an offer, a proposal for something special. I didn't take him seriously at first, but then things started happening. First a few whispers, then gifts, and then phone calls, threatening calls. And now today he's demanded I do something I can't. Wolfe did not move, but I saw his interest shift. He didn't care for drama, especially of the personal kind. But blackmail. That was a matter of manipulation, and manipulation was a thing Wolfe understood better than most. "Let me see if I understand, Miss Melrose," Wolfe said, his voice still calm but with an edge of something sharper, more calculating. "You say Clark Donovan is blackmailing you, but you haven't yet explained what he's holding over you or what he wants from you. Your silence is noteworthy." Violet hesitated, then looked at him. "He wants me to use my program to air his new project, a special broadcast. It's not something I can support, but if I refuse, he'll ruin me. He's threatening to release something about my past, something that could destroy everything I've built." Wolfe's lips curled slightly into a thin smile. It wasn't one of amusement, it was one of calculation. "We shall see," he said softly. "Tell me, Miss Melrose, do you have any idea how he came to know about this secret?" Violet shifted in her seat, her anxiety growing by the second. "No, but I have a feeling that someone is helping him." "Then I suggest you rest. I will begin the investigation immediately. You may find yourself having to make a difficult decision," Wolfe replied, his voice colder now. Violet stood up, nodded briefly, and left the room without another word. She was gone, but Wolfe's mind had already moved to the next step of this intricate puzzle. The wheels were turning, and he was about to expose the layers of deception surrounding this radio personality's secret. I watched Wolfe lean back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. It was clear he had already made up his mind about how to proceed. It was a game of intellect and control, and as always, Wolfe would dominate. Violet's departure left an unusual silence hanging in the air. It wasn't the comfortable kind that comes with a brief moment of rest, but the kind that signals the beginning of something troubling. I had watched her closely as she left, her eyes darting nervously between Wolfe and me like a bird constantly on edge, unsure of where the next threat might come from. Her secret, whatever it was, seemed to weigh on her more than her composed exterior let on. Wolfe didn't waste time, not even a minute. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, he slid his chair closer to his desk and reached for a piece of paper. His fingers hovered above it, and I knew immediately that the investigation had begun in his mind long before it had officially begun. "You're thinking something, Wolfe," I said, leaning back against the doorframe. "What's the first step?" He didn't answer immediately, instead tapping his fingers on the paper before him. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips as his eyes lifted from the page to meet mine. "I'll need a list of the people in Miss Melrose's life. All the names she's mentioned, all the people connected to her, including Clark Donovan. I'll also need to know everything about her past that she might consider damaging." I nodded. This was typical Wolfe. We weren't starting with the obvious. We were digging into the human landscape, the things Violet hadn't told us yet. The puzzle wasn't the blackmail itself. It was how this situation came to be in the first place. "Why her? Why now?" "I'll head over to the radio station," I said. "Get a feel for Donovan's world, you know, the usual stuff. Background, history, and maybe a chat with the right people." Wolfe raised an eyebrow, the subtle gesture that always made me feel as though he was scrutinizing a chessboard several moves ahead. "You may do that, Archie, but I expect you to focus on what's important. Donovan isn't our primary concern just yet." "Who is then?" "Whoever is behind this," Wolfe said with quiet intensity. "Someone else is pulling the strings. Donovan is too obvious. We're not dealing with a man who's as clever as he thinks. This is something deeper, something more insidious." I studied Wolfe's expression, watching as he sank deeper into thought, his fingers tapping once more against the desk. His gaze was fixed on the window, though his mind was clearly elsewhere, unpicking the threads that connected Violet Melrose to this carefully constructed web of blackmail. I knew better than to interrupt him while he worked through his deductions, so I left the office, knowing that I would return with whatever material Wolfe needed. The hunt had begun in earnest. The radio station had all the sterile, buttoned-up formality of any major broadcast operation, but there was an air of tension that seemed to linger just beneath the polished surface. The receptionist barely looked up when I entered, her face a mask of indifference. It was the kind of place where they expected you to know who you were looking for, to have a purpose beyond simple curiosity. I slid my hat off and walked past the receptionist's desk, offering a nonchalant smile. "Clark Donovan. Is he available?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she finally spoke. "Mr. Donovan's in a meeting, but I can have him call you. Actually, I'm here for something a little more personal," I said smoothly, leaning against the counter. "I'm a private investigator working on a case that concerns Miss Melrose. I need a few details about his recent activities. Maybe you can help with that." The receptionist's face tightened, her eyes flicking briefly to the phone on her desk. "You're not the first to ask," she muttered, more to herself than to me. Then, with a resigned sigh, she stood. "I'll see if I can get you a few minutes. Just wait here." I did as she asked, sitting in the lobby while I tried to absorb the atmosphere around me. It wasn't long before I saw Clark Donovan walk through the door, a tall, imposing figure whose presence filled the space before his voice ever did. His crisp suit, the tie that looked just a little too perfect, everything about him screamed power, the kind of power that was as carefully managed as the station's broadcasts. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto me instantly, and I could see the recognition flicker. Donovan had a reputation, and I knew enough about him to be wary. "You're here about Violet, I take it?" Donovan asked, his voice low and controlled. He didn't wait for my answer before continuing. "I don't know what you've heard, but I don't take kindly to people poking around in my business. What's your interest?" I gave him a smile, leaning forward in my chair. "Nothing that concerns you. I'm just here to ask a few questions. We're looking into a possible misunderstanding. You know how these things go." He didn't seem to be buying it, but he was too cautious to simply shut me out. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him into a nearby office, away from prying eyes. Once we were seated, Donovan's posture relaxed, but there was an edge in his eyes that didn't match the calmness of his body language. "What exactly are you looking for, Mr. Goodwin?" he asked, his tone now quieter but still firm. "I don't have time for games." "I'm not here to play games," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Violet's in trouble. She came to us for help, and I'd like to understand how you fit into this little mess." Donovan shifted in his chair, clearly considering his next words. He was a man who wasn't used to being on the defensive. "Miss Melrose has had a rough few months. She's been difficult, but that's hardly news to anyone in the industry. She thinks someone's after her. I've been trying to help, but she's got her own ideas." "What does that mean exactly?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think she's some kind of innocent victim in all this? She's playing a dangerous game herself. People don't get to where she is without making a few enemies along the way." I let the silence sit between us, giving him enough space to feel the weight of his own words. Wolfe's earlier assessment came back to me in that moment. Donovan wasn't the mastermind. He was merely a pawn, too eager to appear in control but ultimately unimportant. Then who's pulling the strings? I asked. Donovan didn't answer immediately, but the subtle shift in his posture told me he knew exactly who I was talking about. It seemed like things were about to get very interesting. Donovan's silence hung between us, thick and charged. The tension in the room was palpable, a quiet storm waiting for the right moment to break. I could see his eyes flicker to the door, calculating his options. He wasn't the type to easily reveal his hand, but he knew I wasn't leaving until I got what I needed. He leaned back in his chair, the polished wood creaking under his weight. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk, but there was a crack in his composure now, a small crack that I could exploit. "You want to know who's pulling the strings?" Donovan finally said, his voice lower than before. He paused, as if measuring my reaction. "It's not me, if that's what you're hoping for. I don't need to pull anyone's strings. I've got more than enough leverage on my own." I waited, watching him carefully. He was deflecting, but I was patient. He'd get to the point eventually, or I'd make sure he did. "Then why are you so nervous?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "If you're in control, Donovan, why? Is it that every time I ask about Violet, you look like you've been caught with your hand in the cookie jar?" He glared at me for a moment, then his expression softened just a little. "I'm not nervous, Goodwin," he said, but there was a flicker of doubt in his voice. "But you're right about one thing. It's not about me. The real threat, the one behind this whole thing, is someone with a lot more power than either of us. You want to know who's behind Violet's blackmail? It's someone who's been watching her for months, maybe even longer." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I kept my eyes on him, studying his every movement. There was something about the way he was talking now that felt rehearsed, like he'd said these words before to someone else. "You know him, don't you?" I asked, leaning in. "You know who it is?" Donovan's eyes widened for a brief moment, then narrowed, and he slowly shook his head. "You're a good investigator, Goodwin, I'll give you that. But this isn't something you can just stumble into. There's a lot at stake here, more than you realize." "Tell me," I said, "and maybe we can avoid a situation where you regret not speaking sooner." His lips pressed together in a tight line. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker with the weight of his silence. Then finally he exhaled slowly, as if giving in to some unseen pressure. "You're right," he muttered. "I'm not going to get out of this without someone knowing. It's Stephen Crowley." The name hit me like a cold gust of wind. Stephen Crowley. I'd heard the name before. He was the head of the network, the one who ran the show behind the scenes, the one whose influence stretched through every department, every show, every contract. He wasn't someone you went up against unless you were prepared to lose everything. "Crowley," I repeated, savoring the sound of the name. "And what's his angle in all this? Why does he want to destroy Violet?" Donovan shifted uncomfortably, in his chair. "He doesn't want to destroy her, not exactly, but he wants control. Violet's got something Crowley wants, something she's been hiding for a long time. She doesn't even know what she's sitting on, but Crowley does. That's why he's pushing her. He's going to get what he wants, no matter what it takes. If Violet doesn't play along, he'll ruin her, and everyone around her." I leaned back, processing his words. The pieces were starting to come together, but there were still gaps. Donovan clearly didn't have the full picture, and Crowley, despite his power, seemed like a shadowy figure, lurking just outside of reach. There was more to this than just a simple blackmail scheme. "So what's Crowley holding over her head?" I asked. "What's the secret?" Donovan's face tightened again, and for a moment he looked as though he might speak, but then he pressed his lips together, unwilling to share more. "That's not something I know for sure, but I've seen the way he looks at her. It's like he's trying to figure out what's going to break her." I stood up, feeling the weight of the conversation settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just about Violet Melrose anymore. It was about something far more dangerous, a battle for power between people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. "I need to talk to Crowley," I said. Donovan looked at me, his eyes narrowing with warning. "You think you can just waltz in and have a conversation with Crowley? He's not like the rest of us. He's a machine, Goodwin. You won't get anywhere unless he decides to let you in." "Maybe," I said, my voice firm, "but I've got a few tricks of my own. And I'll make sure Wolfe's got everything we need to tie this up tight." Donovan stood up as if to end the conversation. "You're wasting your time," he said, but there was something else in his voice now, something almost like respect. "But if you're going to do this, just remember one thing. Don't try to outsmart Crowley. He's always 3 steps ahead of everyone. Always. I gave him a nod, turning on my heel. I had what I needed from him. For now. Donovan's words stuck with me as I left the station, but I wasn't about to back down. Crowley was the key, and I was going to find a way to make him talk. The rest of the day slipped by in a haze of interviews and phone calls, but as the sun began to set and the streets darkened outside the brownstone, I knew that the real challenge was about to begin. Wolfe had started to unravel the mystery from his end, and I had my work cut out for me on the ground. The pieces were almost in place. I just had to make sure I didn't miss anything crucial. And with Wolfe at the helm, I knew that the truth was coming, no matter how carefully Crowley tried to hide it. The evening air was cool as I walked back to the brownstone, the city lights casting long shadows on the sidewalks. The case was coming to a head, but the more I uncovered, the more questions I had. Crowley was the linchpin, the puppet master who seemed to be pulling every string in this twisted drama. But why Violet? What secret did she hold that made her the target of such a high-stakes game? I entered the brownstone and made my way upstairs to the office. Wolfe was exactly where I had left him, seated in his chair, completely still, as if he had not moved an inch since I had last seen him. The scent of his orchids filled the room, the faint aroma a constant in the otherwise tense atmosphere. He didn't need to ask how it had gone. I could tell by the way his brow was furrowed that he was already deep in thought, putting the pieces together in his mind. I didn't waste any time. "It's Crowley," I said, the words falling from my lips with a weight that seemed to settle in the air between us. "He's the one behind the blackmail, but there's something else. He's not just after money or power. He's after control of Violet, of her past and of the station. There's something she knows, something she's been keeping hidden, and Crowley is the one pulling the strings to get to it." Wolfe didn't react at first. He simply regarded me with his usual calm, as though processing the information in his methodical way. After a long pause, he spoke. "Control," he murmured, his voice thoughtful. "A man like Crowley doesn't just seek power for power's sake. He seeks it for something more, something far more personal. If Violet holds a secret, then it's not just a matter of blackmail, it's a matter of leverage. And what does she know, I wonder?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "That's what I don't know yet. Donovan was of no use. He knows Crowley's after something, but not what it is. He doesn't even know what Violet has that's so valuable. But Crowley, he's calculated. He's been watching her. He knows something we don't." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, a familiar gleam in his gaze. "Then we must find out what Violet is hiding. I suggest we start with the station, where she works. It's possible that the answer lies there, hidden beneath layers of mundane appearances." I nodded, my mind already racing through the possibilities. Wolfe was right, of course. The station was the key to unlocking this mystery. Crowley had access to it, and Violet had lived in its shadow for years. If there was a secret buried in her past, it was likely connected to something or someone there. "I'll head back to the station tomorrow," I said, moving toward the door. "Maybe I'll get lucky and find something, anything that leads us closer to the truth." Wolfe didn't respond immediately, but I felt his eyes follow me as I walked toward the exit. Before I could open the door, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "Don't waste time on the obvious, Archie. Crowley is no fool. If he's truly behind this, then the truth is far more elusive than you realize. You'll need to dig deeper. Go to the source. Find someone who knows Violet, truly knows her. Not just the woman on the radio, but the woman behind it all." His words echoed in my mind as I stepped out into the cool night. Wolfe was right, of course. The surface-level investigation had taken me only so far. I needed to find the root of the problem, the place where this all began. Crowley had something on Violet, and whatever that something was, it was buried deep. The next morning I found myself back at the station. The lights inside were dim, and the building had a quiet, almost oppressive feel to it. The receptionist didn't even look up as I walked past her, but I wasn't here for a formal interview. I was looking for something more than what I could get from a phone call or a polite conversation with one of the higher-ups. I moved through the hallways, my eyes scanning the doors, the offices. Everything seemed too clean, too polished. It felt like the kind of place where secrets could easily be swept under the rug, hidden in plain sight. I finally made my way to Violet's old studio, the one she used for her late-night broadcasts. It was empty now, the equipment sitting idle as though waiting for her to return. I stepped inside, my eyes tracing the familiar setup, the microphones, the soundboards, the mixing equipment. It was a carefully controlled space, designed to make everything sound perfect. But as I studied the room, I noticed something unusual. One of the drawers in the desk was slightly open, just enough to catch my attention. I moved closer and pulled it open, revealing a stack of old tapes and documents, nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. But as I flipped through them, one tape caught my eye. It was labeled simply, "Violet's Secret." I paused, my heart beating a little faster. This was it. Whatever Crowley was after, it was in that tape. And if I could figure out what it contained, I could finally get the upper hand in this game. I didn't waste any time. I slipped the tape into the recorder, adjusting the dials until I could hear the faint hum of the machine. The moment the tape started to play, I knew I had uncovered something important. There was a voice on the recording, Violet's voice, speaking in hushed tones. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she was saying. "But I couldn't let it go, not after everything that happened." The rest of the recording was muffled, but I could make out enough to know that this wasn't just a confession. It was something far deeper, something that had been hidden away for years. As the tape played on, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Whatever this secret was, it had the potential to destroy everything. I turned off the recorder and sat back in the chair, my mind racing. This was the breakthrough I needed. Violet had a secret, and it wasn't just something Crowley could use to manipulate her. It was something that could destroy her if it got out. The game had changed. I sat there for a long moment, the tape still on the desk, its contents swirling in my mind. Violet's words echoed, haunting, heavy with the weight of something unsaid, something buried for far too long. I had the feeling that I had just scratched the surface of a far deeper problem, one that could unravel more than just Violet's career. This wasn't merely a case of blackmail. This was about control, about secrets that had been concealed so carefully that even those closest to Violet might not fully understand what she was hiding. I knew I couldn't let the mystery fester. Wolfe had been clear. If I wanted answers, I needed to dig deeper. The surface was only ever a distraction. The key to this case was in what wasn't immediately visible, in the things that people kept hidden. I grabbed the tape and tucked it into my coat pocket, my mind already racing with possibilities. I needed to get back to Wolfe. He would want to hear this recording, but more than that, he would know exactly what to do next. I turned away from the desk, casting one last look at the sterile, dimly lit room. There was something about this place that felt off, like a carefully constructed facade where the truth was locked away in hidden corners. I made my way back to the main hall, moving quickly, but without haste. The weight of what I had uncovered seemed to grow heavier with each step. I knew that Violet wasn't the only one with something to lose. Crowley, for all his power and control, had something far more dangerous to fear. If his connection to Violet's secret became public, it could destroy him too. But what exactly was that secret? And why was Crowley so desperate to control it? I left the station and caught a cab back to the brownstone. It wasn't until I was halfway there that I realized I hadn't even thought to check in with the police. They were usually involved in cases like this, but Wolfe didn't play by their rules. He was far more strategic, and I trusted his method. In this case, getting the police involved too soon might only muddy the waters. No, this was something Wolfe could handle when he was ready. I arrived at the brownstone, barely noticing the time. The city was alive around me, but inside these walls it felt like a different world altogether. I stepped into the lobby, and before I could even call out, I saw Wolfe standing by the staircase, his eyes sharp, his expression unreadable. "I assume you found something, Archie," he said, his tone as calm as always, but with an undercurrent of something more. "I have," I said, pulling the tape from my pocket and handing it over to him. Wolfe took it without a word and set it carefully on his desk. He didn't need to ask me what it was. He already knew. He sat back in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping the arms of it as he studied the tape. I could see him processing, analyzing, as his mind worked through the puzzle in a way that only he could. He had already put the pieces together, I was sure of it. I just had to wait for him to share his thoughts. After a moment, he reached for the recorder and pressed play. The sound of Violet's voice filled the room, soft and strained. Wolfe's face remained neutral as he listened, the only movement his fingers as they drummed lightly against the desk. I could see his mind racing, but he kept his thoughts tightly guarded. He wasn't one to share his deductions until he was absolutely sure. When the tape ended, he pressed stop and leaned back, his eyes briefly closing as though to process what he had heard. "Well, Archie, it seems we have a situation on our hands," he said, his voice as measured as ever, though the gravity of the situation wasn't lost on me. "You don't say," I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. "What do you make of it?" Wolfe's gaze shifted to me, his eyes sharp and focused. "Violet's secret is not just personal. It's a matter of power, of influence. But more importantly, it's tied to something much larger than she realizes. I believe Crowley is not only after her, he's after control of something. Something that she unwittingly possesses." I frowned, trying to make sense of his words. But what could she have that Crowley wants so badly? "It doesn't make sense. She's just a radio host." "Indeed," Wolfe replied, his voice steady, but filled with an unspoken tension. "But sometimes it's not about what a person knows, but about what they represent. Violet, in her naivety, may have unknowingly become a pawn in a much larger game. Crowley's interest in her goes beyond blackmail. It's about what she might do next, what she might reveal, and what secrets others are desperate to keep buried." I sat down, absorbing his words. Crowley's game was bigger than I had thought. He wasn't just trying to control Violet. He was controlling the narrative, trying to mold her into something that could serve his purpose, whatever that might be. "Then we need to figure out what that is," I said, my voice firm. "We need to know what Violet's hiding, what Crowley is afraid of." Wolfe nodded slowly. "Precisely, and to do that we'll have to take a more direct approach." I raised an eyebrow. "Direct? You mean confront Crowley?" Wolfe smiled, a rare and slight curve of his lips. "Not just yet, Archie. First, we'll need to uncover the source of this power he seeks. If we are to confront Crowley, we must do so with the full understanding of what he stands to lose." I felt the weight of his words settle on me. We were nearing the endgame, but the true nature of this puzzle was still out of reach. Crowley had a secret to protect, but Violet's was just as dangerous. There was something about her, something more than her radio persona, that had put her in the middle of this battle. If I was going to solve this, I needed to get to the heart of what both of them were hiding, and I needed to do it quickly. "Let's start with the station," I said, standing up. "I'll go back there. There has to be something I'm missing, something in the files, in the records. We're getting closer, Wolfe. I can feel it." Wolfe gave a short nod. "Be careful, Archie. The closer you get, the more dangerous this will become." I looked at him, a sense of determination settling over me. "I'll be careful, but this is getting to the heart of things, Wolfe. We can't back off now." And with that, I left the office, the weight of the case on my shoulders. The truth was within reach. If only I could find it before Crowley did. The air in the station was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the hum of equipment. Just another ordinary day in a world that had now become anything but ordinary. I stood in front of the station's records room, the heavy metal door looming like a barrier between me and whatever secrets it might hold. Inside, old files, press clippings, and countless hours of broadcasts filled the shelves, neatly organized, but seemingly untouched by time. I felt the familiar unease in the pit of my stomach, that low burn that always came with digging into something that had been hidden for far too long. There was a sense of quiet urgency now, a pressure that had been building ever since I'd first stepped into this investigation. Crowley was watching. He always was. The game was no longer a matter of tracking down a blackmailer or even a criminal. It was a matter of survival, both for Violet and for me. I pushed open the door and stepped into the cramped room. The low light flickered overhead, casting long shadows over the rows of dusty files. As I began to sift through the folders, each one felt like a breadcrumb leading me deeper into this maze of deception. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence, and for a moment it almost felt as if the station itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for me to uncover whatever it was that Crowley had spent so long trying to protect. I didn't waste time on the basics. I knew that if I were going to find something useful, it had to be buried in the minutiae. Something overlooked, something insignificant on the surface, but pivotal underneath. I pulled out a file labeled Violet Melrose, something I hadn't noticed before. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, half expecting to find the answer I was looking for. The first few pages were full of press clippings, radio ratings, and interview transcripts. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, near the back, I found a set of letters. They were dated from a few years ago, just before Violet's rise to fame, and they were addressed to her. The handwriting was neat, calculated, and familiar. Too familiar. It was Crowley's. I ran my fingers over the paper, the words forming a damning picture as I read between the lines. The letters were filled with praise, but there was an underlying tension to them, an almost possessive tone that made my skin crawl. Crowley had been in her life far longer than I had initially thought. His influence wasn't just professional, it was personal. He had been grooming her, shaping her into something. But what? I continued to read, each letter revealing a little, more of his intentions. He had been subtly manipulating her even back then, offering opportunities in exchange for loyalty, for obedience. The final letter in the pile was the most chilling of all. It was written just a month before Violet's sudden rise to the top of the airwaves, and it contained a single, almost cryptic line. "You'll be ready when I need you. You always have been." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Crowley's control over Violet wasn't just about her career. It was about something much more personal, something that went back years. What had he done to her? What hold did he have over her that made her so willing to submit to his demands? I closed the file and placed it back on the shelf, trying to steady my breath. This wasn't just a case of blackmail anymore. Crowley's hold over Violet was far deeper, and whatever secret she had, it wasn't just a threat to her career. It was a threat to her very freedom. I stepped out of the records room, my mind racing with what I had uncovered. But before I could make it to the exit, I saw someone coming down the hall toward me. It was a man I didn't recognize, a middle-aged fellow with a dark suit, his eyes scanning the hallway nervously as if he was afraid someone might be watching. Him. He saw me before I had a chance to turn away, and his eyes widened, as if he was caught in the act of something. I didn't have time to wonder why he was acting suspiciously. I needed answers, and he looked like he might have them. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. He stopped short, his hands trembling as he adjusted his tie. For a moment I thought he was going to walk right past me, but then he hesitated, his eyes darting around as though he was trying to make a decision. "You're Archie Goodwin, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low and unsure. "That's right." "And you are?" He swallowed hard, then offered a shaky smile. "I'm Evan Wallace. I work in the legal department here at the station. I think I can help you." I raised an eyebrow. "Help me? With what?" "I've been following your investigation," he said quickly, glancing over his shoulder, to make sure no one was listening. "I know you're looking into Crowley and Violet Melrose." His voice dropped even lower, as though the very mention of her name could cause trouble. "There's more going on here than you think. I can't say too much, but there's something Crowley's been hiding, something he's desperate to keep buried." I felt the tension in the room escalate. "Go on." Wallace took a deep breath, his hands now visibly shaking. "It's not just a matter of business. Crowley's been using the station for his own personal agendas, and Violet, she's been caught in the middle of it all. It's not what it seems. She's involved in something dangerous, Archie. I don't know all the details, but it's big. And Crowley's more dangerous than you realize." I stared at him, weighing his words. There was something off about him. He wasn't a man used to being involved in scandals or criminal activity, but whatever he knew, it was enough to shake him. "What do you know about this secret?" I asked, trying to get him to open up. "What is it?" He hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the hallway again. He seemed ready to run, like a man on the verge of a breakdown. "I can't tell you everything, but there's a file that Crowley's kept locked away. It's about Violet's past, the truth about who she really is." Before I could press him further, Wallace seemed to snap. He straightened up and shook his head. "I can't do this. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. If Crowley finds out I've talked to you—" He broke off, his voice trailing away in a panic. He turned and rushed down the hallway, disappearing into the maze of offices. I stood there, still processing what he had said. A file. The truth about Violet's past. I knew what I had to do next. Crowley's game wasn't just about control over Violet's career. It was about hiding something far more dangerous. I had to find that file, and I had to do it before anyone else did. I walked back toward the exit, the weight of the case heavier now than it had ever been. The deeper I dug, the more the pieces shifted, and the more I realized just how far Crowley was willing to go to protect his secret. I was getting closer, but the closer I got, the more dangerous things became. The station had a different feel, now almost suffocating. There was a sense of urgency in the air, and though I hadn't yet connected all the dots, I felt as though I was being pulled deeper into something I wasn't fully prepared to understand. Wallace had given me just enough to make me realize that Crowley's grip on Violet, on the station itself, went beyond the obvious. It was a web of manipulation, and I was in the center of it, trying to untangle a mess that seemed to stretch out of control. I knew I needed to act fast. Wallace's warning had been clear. Crowley would stop at nothing to protect whatever he was hiding. The file Wallace mentioned, the one locked away, hidden in the depths of the station, was my only lead. If I didn't find it first, Crowley would, and I would be left chasing shadows. I left the station without another word to Wallace, my mind focused on one thing: finding that file. I had to move quickly, but I also had to be careful. Crowley was too smart to let something like this slip by. He had eyes everywhere, and the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it would become. By the time I arrived back at the brownstone, I had already made up my mind. I couldn't go back to the station without a plan. I needed to be strategic, take the right steps without tipping my hand. Wolfe had been quiet all afternoon, lost in his own thoughts as I had come and gone. But now, as I walked into his office, I could feel the tension building between us. He hadn't said much since I'd handed him the tape, but I could tell he had been thinking. "Well, Archie, Wolfe's voice cut through the silence, and I knew he was waiting for me to explain everything I had uncovered. His eyes met mine with that steady, calculating gaze, as though he already knew everything but was letting me fill in the blanks. I sat down, my hands resting on the edge of his desk. It's worse than I thought. Crowley's been playing a much bigger game than I realized. Violet's got something on him, something big, and I need to find it. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. You're not suggesting that this is a mere case of blackmail anymore? No, I said, shaking my head. This is personal. Crowley's been controlling Violet for years, and whatever she's hiding, it's something he's been waiting for. The question is why. What's so dangerous that he'll go this far to keep it hidden? Wolfe steepled his fingers and leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he processed my words. You've learned much more than you realize, Archie. The puzzle pieces are in front of you. Now the trick is to figure out how they fit together. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the case settle deeper into my chest. I'm going to find the file Wallace mentioned, the one Crowley's been hiding. It's the only lead I have left, and it could be the key to everything. Wolfe nodded slowly. A file, yes, but remember, Archie, the file may not be what you think it is. Crowley isn't one to leave things to chance. If he's hidden something, it will be well protected. I stood up, pacing for a moment. I'll figure it out. I have to. There's no other way. Wolfe's gaze followed me as I walked toward the door. Be careful, Archie. Crowley is not a man to be underestimated. He has far more to lose than you think. I nodded without turning back, knowing Wolfe was right. The closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it would become. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was this close. The station felt different when I returned. It was late now, the hum of the offices quieter than it had been earlier in the day. The building seemed almost abandoned, the lights dim and flickering overhead. I made my way to the records room again, trying to keep a low profile, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't have much time before Crowley or someone else would catch on. I slipped into the room without a sound, my eyes scanning the shelves of files, each one seemingly more innocuous than the last. But I knew that somewhere in these rows, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and red tape, was the file that would change everything. I went straight to the back of the room, where Wallace had hinted the more sensitive documents were kept. There, near the floor, I found a locked cabinet, just as I had expected. I had no key, of course, but that wasn't going to stop me. I took a deep breath and pulled a small set of tools from my pocket, the ones I kept for just such an occasion. It didn't take long before the lock clicked open. Inside, I found a series of files all neatly stacked. But one stood out immediately, a thick folder with a red seal stamped across it. Confidential, it read. The word felt like a challenge, daring me to open it, daring me to uncover what Crowley had so carefully hidden. I pulled the file from the cabinet, my hands shaking slightly as I flipped it open. The first few pages were standard, contracts, business deals, and ratings reports. But then I saw it, a set of photographs, all taken in secret, all showing Violet in a different light. She was younger here, in her early 20s, and there were men in the photos, men who looked like they could be important but who I didn't recognize. The images were grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but the more I looked, the more I realized what they were. These weren't just innocent photos, they were evidence. I flipped through the pages, my mind racing. There was a name that kept coming up, Stephen Harwood. It was clear from the documents that this man had been involved with Violet at some point, intimately involved by the look of things. But there was something off about him, something that didn't sit right. He wasn't just a lover or a colleague. He was tied to Crowley, and now it seemed he was tied to Violet's secret as well. I turned the page again, my eyes scanning the words before I stopped dead. The last document in the folder was a letter, written in the same neat handwriting I'd seen in Crowley's letters to Violet. The tone was cold, calculating, and the words jumped out at me. "You've made your choice, Violet. There is no turning back now. If you tell anyone what you know, I will make sure this man never sees the light of day again. Your secret will remain with me forever." I felt a chill run through me. This was it. This was what Crowley had been hiding. Whatever Violet had known, whatever she had been involved in with Harwood, it had the power to destroy Crowley. And him too. This was the leverage he had over her, the thing he'd been keeping under wraps for years. I snapped the file shut, my mind racing. The truth was finally within reach, and now the stakes were higher than ever. I had to find Violet and get to her before Crowley did. There was no more time to waste. The air felt thicker as I left the station, the weight of what I had uncovered, pressing down on me. I could feel the quiet hum of the city around me, but my mind was focused entirely on the file, on the documents, and on the growing sense of urgency that seemed to pulse through everything. Crowley's grip on Violet was deeper than I had realized, and whatever leverage he had over her, whatever dark secret they were both hiding, was something that could not be ignored any longer. If I didn't act quickly, I knew it wouldn't just be Violet's career on the line. It would be her life. I knew I had to find her, but first I needed to figure out exactly how much of this she knew. How involved had she been in whatever Crowley and Harwood were scheming? Had she even realized the danger she was in? Or had she been too caught up in Crowley's promises of power and influence to see the truth of his manipulation? The brownstone was quiet when I returned. Wolfe was exactly where I had left him, his chair positioned just so, his fingers tapping the desk in his usual rhythm. His eyes flickered up to meet mine as I stepped inside. There was no need for words. He could tell from my expression that something had shifted in the case. "Well, Archie." Wolfe's voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it now. He had been waiting for me to return with something significant. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I found it. The file Crowley's been hiding." I set the folder down on Wolfe's desk with a soft thud. His gaze flickered to it, but he didn't touch it immediately. He studied me instead, his eyes narrowing as he waited for me to continue. "I know now why Crowley's so desperate to keep Violet under his thumb. It's not just about blackmail, it's about something far bigger, something that could destroy him if it came to light. There's a man in these documents, Stephen Harwood. He's the key to everything. He's connected to both Violet and Crowley, but he's been kept in the shadows. Whatever happened between them, it's what Crowley's afraid of." Wolfe didn't respond right away. His fingers tapped once, twice on the desk, his mind clearly working through the details. "I've always believed that power lies in secrets, Archie," he said, after a long pause. "And it seems Crowley's secret is a very well-guarded one." "Exactly," I said, leaning forward. "But now we need to figure out how to use it. This isn't just about finding the truth anymore. It's about making sure Crowley doesn't use it against Violet or anyone else. If he's been keeping this secret for so long, it means he's ready to do whatever it takes to protect it." Wolfe's gaze flickered to the file again, but he remained motionless. His eyes were still calculating, the gears of his mind turning, slowly but surely. "You're right, Archie. The stakes have changed, and I'm afraid we can't just sit back and wait for Crowley to make his next move. We must strike first." I felt a sharp tension in the air as Wolfe's words sank in. We were no longer in the realm of simple deduction. We were at the edge of something dangerous. Crowley had proven that he would stop at nothing to protect his secrets, and Violet was just the latest pawn in his game. I stood up, moving toward the window. The city was sprawled out beneath me, the lights casting long shadows across the streets. My mind was racing. "I need to find Violet, Wolfe. She's the key. If we can get to her before Crowley does, we might still have a chance to turn this around." "So you may be right, Archie," Wolfe said, his voice cool but filled with the steady determination I had come to expect from him. "But remember, we must be careful. Crowley is far more dangerous than we realize. He has the resources to keep his secrets buried at any cost. I nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle more heavily on my shoulders. I wasn't just chasing down a blackmailer anymore. I was trying to protect a woman caught in a web of manipulation and power that she hadn't fully understood. I didn't know if she was even aware of just how deep this went, but I was going to find out. "Where do we start?" Wolfe asked, his voice cutting through my thoughts. I turned back to face him, my mind already working through the next steps. "We need to find out where Violet is. If she's still at the station, I'll start there. But I have a feeling she's gone into hiding. We need to get to her before Crowley does, and we need to make sure she's prepared for what's coming." Wolfe's eyes never left me as I spoke, and I could see the wheels in his mind turning. He was already planning the next move, already thinking 5 steps ahead. "I will contact my associates," Wolfe said, finally breaking the silence. "We may need their help to track her down. In the meantime, I suggest you gather what information you can about Harwood. If he's truly the key to this, we need to know everything about him." I nodded. Wolfe's suggestion was solid. If Harwood had been a part of this from the beginning, we needed to understand who he was, where he had been, and how he fit into the puzzle. I couldn't afford to leave any stone unturned. "Understood," I said. "I'll get started right away." I turned and walked toward the door, but before I left, Wolfe called out to me, his voice steady and firm. "Remember, Archie, Crowley is not a man who will surrender easily. You must be prepared for anything. And keep your wits about you. The closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous things will become." I paused at the door, meeting Wolfe's gaze. "I know," I said, "but I don't have a choice. I'm going after Violet, Wolfe, and I'm not stopping until I get the answers we need." With that, I stepped out into the night. The city was quieter now, but the tension still hung in the air, thick and oppressive. There was no turning back. This was the moment of truth. Crowley's game was over. I just had to make sure Violet didn't become its final casualty. The night was cold as I walked through the quiet streets, the rhythmic sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty air. The city, for all its noise during the day, seemed to hold its breath at night as though waiting for something, or someone. I was used to that feeling, that sense of anticipation that lingered in the air before a big reveal. But tonight, there was something different. The pressure was heavier. Crowley's game had escalated, and now it was no longer just about finding answers. It was about protecting someone who was caught in a web too tangled for her to unravel on her own. I pulled my coat tighter around me, my mind focused on one thing: Violet. Where could she be? What had Crowley done to her? I had no time to waste, not when I was so close to the truth. I knew the station would be of no use. Violet wasn't there anymore, but I also knew that Crowley would be watching her. He always did. The question was, where would he keep her hidden? Somewhere safe, somewhere he could control. I pulled out my phone and dialed Wolfe. He picked up on the second ring, his voice steady, calm as ever. "Have you found her?" Wolfe's voice cut through the night air, low and deliberate. "No," I replied, the frustration creeping into my tone despite my best efforts to keep it in check. "But I have a feeling Crowley's got her somewhere. He won't risk her going public, not with what she knows." "You must proceed carefully." "Archie," Wolfe warned, "Crowley is a man who understands fear and control better than most. He will be watching her every move, and he may be watching yours as well." "I know," I said. "I'm headed to the old warehouse district. It's a place he's used before to hide things or people. If Violet's anywhere, it's there." Wolfe's voice softened, just a hint of concern breaking through the usual calm. "Be careful, Archie. If you're right, then you are walking into the lion's den." "I'll be fine," I said, though even I wasn't convinced. I didn't have a choice anymore. This wasn't just a job, it was personal now. I hung up the phone, shoving it back into my pocket, and quickened my pace. The warehouse district was a forgotten part of the city, a place where the buildings had been left to decay, their windows boarded up and their doors sealed. It wasn't the kind of place people visited unless they had something to hide. As I approached the area, the moonlight barely pierced through the haze of city lights, leaving everything shrouded in a soft, eerie glow. The streets were deserted, the silence broken only by the occasional clink of metal and the distant hum of traffic. I was close now, closer than I had been to the truth in weeks. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I slowed my pace as I reached the edge of the district, my eyes scanning the darkened streets. I knew Crowley wouldn't be foolish enough to leave Violet exposed, but I also knew he wouldn't be able to resist pulling the strings from the shadows. The warehouse complex loomed ahead, an imposing structure made of brick and steel. It was quiet still, as if no one had been there for years. I approached the nearest entrance, a heavy metal door that creaked in protest as I tested it. Locked, of course, but nothing a little persuasion couldn't fix. I pulled out the small set of tools I kept in my jacket pocket, just for moments like this. In less than a minute, the lock gave way with a satisfying click. I stepped inside, the musty smell of old wood and rusted metal hitting me immediately. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floor creaked beneath my feet. My eyes adjusted to the dim light as I moved through the empty space, the sound of my footsteps, the only thing breaking the silence. The building seemed larger than I remembered, each hallway and room stretching off in different directions. I felt the weight of my surroundings pressing in on me, the dark corners promising secrets and dangers. I had to stay focused. I moved cautiously through the space, pausing every few steps to listen for any sign of movement. The warehouse was empty, at least on the surface, but I knew that didn't mean much. Crowley had always been a master of deception. If Violet was here, I would have to find her before he realized I was close. I turned a corner, my heart pounding in my chest, and froze. There, in the far corner of the room, a figure sat huddled in the shadows. For a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then the figure shifted and I knew. It was her. "Violet?" I called out softly, not wanting to startle her. She didn't move at first, her face hidden in the shadows, but after a long moment she looked up. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too. Recognition. "Archie," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I knew you'd come." I took a cautious step forward, my instincts telling me to be careful. "Are you okay? We need to get out of here. Crowley—" I know," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "He's been watching me. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, maybe weeks. She broke off, her body trembling as she curled up tighter against the wall. I knelt beside her, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're safe now. We're getting you out of here, okay? But I need you to tell me what's going on. What does Crowley want from you? What's this secret he's been hiding?" Violet shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never wanted any of this. I didn't know what I was getting into. Stephen Harwood. He was never supposed to be a part of this. I didn't know he was connected to Crowley. Stephen Harwood." I repeated, the name sounding familiar but not quite clicking. "Who is he? What's his role in all of this?" Violet's breath caught in her throat, and she glanced nervously around the room, as though the very walls had ears. "He's the reason. Crowley's been controlling me. Harwood, he's the one who set this all up. Crowley didn't need me at first. It was Harwood who wanted me involved. They both wanted something from me, something I didn't even know I had." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? What do they want?" Violet looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. "I'm not who you think I am, Archie. I never was. There's something in my past, something I did with Harwood. If Crowley finds out I told you, he'll—" Before she could finish, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned just in time to see a shadow move across the far doorway. Crowley had found us. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, too calculated to be anything but a man who was well aware of the power he wielded. I turned slowly, my heart thudding in my chest, as Crowley stepped into the dim light of the warehouse. His dark suit seemed to absorb the meager light around him, making him appear even more imposing. The faint sound of his shoes on the concrete floor was the only thing I could hear, a low echo that filled the silence between us. Violet stiffened beside me, and I could see the fear in her eyes, a stark contrast to the steely confidence Crowley projected as he approached. He didn't rush, but there was a palpable certainty in his movements. He knew exactly where he was, exactly what he wanted, and he knew that I was just another obstacle in his way. "So, Archie," Crowley said, his voice smooth, almost comforting, like a snake's tongue before the strike. "I should have known you'd find her. You always have a knack for getting into things that don't concern you." I didn't answer him immediately. My hand moved subtly toward my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of my gun, but I didn't pull it out. Not yet. There was no need for a confrontation, unless it became absolutely necessary. Instead, I kept my voice calm, trying to mask the anger that simmered beneath the surface. "What do you want with her, Crowley?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on his. "Why have you been pulling the strings all this time? What's the secret you're so desperate to keep buried?" Crowley stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. His lips curled into a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was enjoying this, savoring the moment like a predator toying with its prey. "You don't understand, do you?" he asked, his tone shifting just enough to make my skin crawl. "This is bigger than you, bigger than Violet even. This isn't about secrets anymore, it's about control. Control of something much larger than either of you could comprehend. I've been keeping things in order, keeping people where they belong. Violet is just a complication." I could feel Violet tense beside me, her breath shallow as she processed his words. She hadn't said much, but I could tell the weight of it all was becoming too much for her. Crowley was playing a game, and he was in complete control of the rules, but I wasn't going to let him win. "You think you can control everything," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but there's always a breaking point. You're not invincible. Crowley, you're going to slip up, and when you do, I'll be there." Crowley's eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than confidence, a hint of frustration. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold, calculating demeanor. "You really think you can beat me?" "Archie, you're already too late. Violet's already made her choice." I stepped closer to Violet, trying to shield her, to offer some small comfort. She didn't deserve to be here. Not like this. She was just a pawn in Crowley's game, and he had been pulling the strings for far too long. "I'll protect her," I said, my words hard and final. "You're not going to get away with this. Whatever you've been hiding, I'm going to expose it." Crowley's smile returned, but this time it was a little colder, a little more twisted. He took a step forward, closing the gap between us. "You're welcome to try, Archie. But you're not in control here. I've spent years building this empire, and I'll be damned if I let you or anyone else tear it down over some trivial little secret." Violet's voice broke the tension before I could respond. "Stop it, Crowley," she said, her words trembling but full of defiance. "You've had control over me for long enough. I'm done running from you." Crowley turned to her, his eyes flashing with annoyance. "You don't know what you're saying, Violet. You're in too deep to turn back now." But Violet didn't flinch. She stood tall, her eyes locked onto his. "I'm not your puppet anymore," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "And I'm not going to let you destroy me or anyone. Else for that matter." For a moment there was silence. Crowley studied her, his expression darkening, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something close to fear. "You're making a mistake, Violet," he said, his voice quiet, now almost pleading. You don't understand the consequences of what you're saying. She took a step back, moving closer to me. I understand perfectly. It's you who doesn't understand. You've been controlling everything from the shadows, but the truth always comes out, Crowley. And when it does, you'll be the one left in the dark. Crowley's gaze shifted between the two of us, and in that moment, I could see the mask of control slip just slightly. He was no longer the unflappable man who had orchestrated everything from the background. There was something vulnerable underneath, the raw fear of losing it all, and that was when I saw my opening. I moved quickly, my hand going to my pocket, but Crowley was faster. Before I could fully react, he had a gun in his hand, pointing it directly at me. The barrel gleamed in the low light, and the silence that followed was deafening. You think you have the upper hand, don't you?" he said, his voice steady once again. "But this ends now, Archie, you and Violet. You're both going to regret this." I didn't flinch, didn't let the fear show. I knew that one misstep, one wrong move, and I'd be dead before I even had the chance to react. But I couldn't let him win. Not like this. "You're wrong, Crowley," I said, my voice low but firm. "You don't control the game anymore." For a second the gun wavered in his hand, just enough for me to notice. That was all it took. In that split second I lunged, knocking the gun out of his hand before he could react. The weapon skittered across the floor, and in the same motion I shoved Crowley back against the wall. He tried to push me off, but I was already on him, using my weight and my strength to keep him pinned. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable now, and I could hear his breath coming in shallow gasps as he struggled against me. "Do you feel it now, Crowley?" I said, my voice steady, almost cold. "This is what it feels like when someone finally takes control." His eyes burned with anger, but he didn't fight back. He was done. The game was over. He had lost. "Get him out of here," I said to Violet, who had been watching the whole exchange with wide eyes. "He's done," as she rushed to the door to call for help. I stood there for a moment, staring down at Crowley. He was broken now, nothing more than a man who had been consumed by his own need for control. And in the end, it had been his downfall. The truth was out, and it wasn't just Violet. Who would be freed? It was everyone he had ever manipulated. His empire had crumbled, and I wasn't done yet. There was still one more piece of the puzzle to uncover, the truth about Stephen Harwood, but that would come later. For now, the most important thing was that we had won. The tension in the warehouse dissolved the moment Crowley was taken away. The fear in his eyes had been replaced with something else entirely: defeat. I watched as he was escorted out, his head hanging low, his once imposing presence now reduced to a broken man. The truth was out, and the pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. But there was still one thing left to resolve. I turned to Violet, who was standing a few feet away, her face pale but resolute. The fear that had gripped her moments ago had melted away, replaced by something quieter but stronger. Relief. But it wasn't just relief. It was a sense of freedom that I could see in her eyes. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling but steadying as she spoke. "You saved me, Archie. I don't even know how to begin thanking you." "You don't have to," I said, giving her a small smile. "I just did what needed to be done." She nodded, the weight of the moment settling between us. I could tell she was still processing everything, still trying to wrap her mind around the fact that Crowley's game was finally over. She had been caught in his web for too long, manipulated by promises and lies, but now she was free, and that was all that mattered. I took a step closer, my voice softer now. "You're safe now, Violet. Crowley won't hurt you again." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "But what about Harwood?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly as she spoke the name. "He's the one who started all of this. I don't know what he wants, but if Crowley's the one controlling everything, then Harwood must be just as dangerous, right?" I nodded, my gaze distant as I thought about Stephen Harwood. He had been the one to pull the strings, the true mastermind behind the scenes. Crawley had been the face, the power, but Harwood had been the one who set everything into motion. The connection between him and Violet was deeper than I had realized, and it was clear that Harwood's influence had extended far beyond just Crowley's control. "We'll deal with Harwood," I said, my voice hardening. "But for now, you need to rest. You've been through enough." Violet looked at me, her expression thoughtful. "And you? What happens to you now, Archie? After all of this is over?" I paused, not sure how to answer her question. The truth was, I didn't know what would happen next. Wolfe had solved the case. He had directed me, guided me, and in the end I had done what needed to be done. But there was still a part of me that felt like I was just getting started. The truth about Harwood, about Violet's past, was still hanging in the air. Crowley's arrest was just the first step. There was so much more to uncover. "I'll be fine," I said, offering her a reassuring smile. "There's still work to be done, but we've won this battle." As I turned to leave, I heard a soft sound behind me. I looked back to see Violet standing there, her hands clasped together in front of her, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. "Archie," she said softly, "thank you for everything. I don't think I would have made it without you." I nodded, giving her one last look before stepping back into the shadows. There was nothing more to say. The case had been solved, the villain taken down, and the truth was out in the open. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the end of this chapter. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting, as always, in his chair, surrounded by the orchids he so meticulously cared for. I could see the faintest hint of a smile on his face as he looked up at me, the lines of tension around his eyes relaxing just a little. "Well, Archie?" he asked, his voice as steady as ever. "Did you manage to get everything wrapped up?" I nodded, sitting down across from him. "It's over, Wolfe. Crowley's done, Violet's safe, and now we just have to deal with Harwood." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he thought. "Harwood will be dealt with in time, I'm sure, but for now we can rest. The case is over and we've done our part." I leaned back in my own chair, letting out a slow breath. It had been a long road, full of twists and turns, but it was over now. The game was won, and it wasn't by brute force or flash, but by patience, intellect, and understanding the game on a deeper level. "Well," I said, standing up to stretch my legs, "I think we've earned a break." Wolfe's lips curled into a faint smile, the smallest acknowledgement of the victory. "Indeed, Archie, and when you've had your rest, we'll turn our attention to the next puzzle." I couldn't help but grin. "You never do stop, do you?" Wolfe's smile grew a little wider, and for the briefest of moments, he looked almost pleased. "You know better than anyone, Archie. The game is never truly over, but for now I think we've earned a moment of peace." I nodded, stepping toward the door. "Thanks, Wolfe, for everything." "Always a pleasure, Archie," he replied, his voice rich with his usual calm authority. "But remember, we both know that peace never lasts long." I stepped out of the office and into the quiet evening, the weight of the case finally lifting from my shoulders. For now, at least, there was peace, and that was enough. And so, the story of Nero Wolfe's final victory over Crowley came to an end. But in the world of Wolfe and Goodwin, there would always be another mystery waiting just around the corner, another case, another puzzle to solve, because in the end, that's what we did best.